7 years after vanishing without a trace, a woman walked into a small-town gun store wearing worn hiking boots and a faded gray shirt. Everyone in the room laughed at her within seconds. 30 minutes later, an old veteran was fighting back tears. 2 government agents were waiting outside with an emergency recall order, and the people who mocked her wished they could take back every word they had said. Because the quiet woman standing at the counter wasn't who she appeared to be. According to the few people who knew her past, she had once worked in a world so secret that almost no official record of her service remained. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories about forgotten heroes and silent warriors, subscribe to Legendary Veterans. Now let's go back to the moment Diana Reeves walked through that door. The bell above the door had barely finished ringing when the laughter started. Kyle, early 20s, backward cap, the kind of confidence that came from never being seriously tested in his life, leaned back against the glass display case and crossed his arms. You sure you didn't mean to go left? Craft store's about 2 blocks down. His 2 friends, one tall with a smirk already loaded, one shorter with a phone halfway raised, thought that was the funniest thing they had heard all day. Diana didn't look at them. She moved down the row of rifles on the wall with her eyes, slow and deliberate, the way a person reads a sentence they already know the ending to. Her gaze settled on a Springfield M1A mounted on the far end. A full-size battle rifle, heavy and serious and out of place next to the sporting guns that surrounded it. She pointed at it without raising her voice. "Can I hold that one?" The shop owner, a broad man in his 50s named Garrett with a silver mustache and a lanyard full of keys, looked up from behind the counter and gave her the kind of look that was trying hard to be polite. "That's a military pattern rifle, ma'am. Not really a beginner piece." He said it the way someone explains a car engine to a person they assume has never opened a hood. "I'm not a beginner," Diana said. Still calm, still looking at the rifle. Garrett hesitated, then shrugged and lifted it down from the mount. He set it on the counter like he was placing a gift she wouldn't understand. Diana reached out, picked it up with both hands, checked the chamber, verified the safety, and began a field strip, methodical, smooth, unhurried, right there on the counter. The components came apart in a sequence that looked practiced because it was. It took her 11 seconds. The store went very quiet. She set the last piece down, aligned the components in perfect order along the glass, and tapped the barrel end twice with one finger. "Your front sight post is canted about half a degree left. Whoever did the last mount didn't torque it down evenly." She said it the same way someone might mention a smudge on a window. Matter of fact, unbothered. Kyle's smirk had gone somewhere. He was staring at the counter. The older man in a camouflage vest 2 aisles over pushed his glasses up his nose and leaned toward the man beside him. "I haven't seen a strip that clean outside a qualification range," he murmured. "That's not YouTube training." But the room wasn't done making its decisions about her yet. And what was about to happen next, the moment that would get replayed, described in veteran forums, referenced in a letter sent to a senator, none of it had started yet. The tall friend, who had stopped smirking, tried to recover. "Okay, so you watched some videos. Can you actually shoot it, or do you just like taking things apart?" He said it louder than he needed to, the way people do when they want a crowd to agree with them. A woman near the ammunition rack glanced up. A teenager near the back leaned on a shelf. Diana looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked at Garrett. "You have an indoor range?" Garrett nodded slowly, his expression somewhere between skeptical and something he couldn't name yet. "I'd like to use it." The range smelled the way they all do, burnt powder, cold metal, recycled air. Diana stood at the firing line and asked for a target set at 75 yards. Garrett raised an eyebrow. The standard range was zeroed for 50. She didn't explain herself. He moved the target. She loaded 5 rounds, rolled her shoulders once, and went still. What happened in the next 40 seconds was the kind of thing that people described differently depending on who they were. The teenagers near the back said it didn't look real. The veteran in the camo vest said it looked exactly like something he had seen once, a long time ago, at a facility he wasn't allowed to name. Garrett said later that he had been running that range for 19 years, and he had never seen a group that tight from a standing position with an unfamiliar rifle. 5 shots. 1 ragged hole in the center of the silhouette. Not 5 holes near each other. 1 hole. The kind of cluster that required not just skill but a particular relationship with the weapon. The kind built over years of doing something in conditions that most people would never survive long enough to describe. Diana lowered the rifle, checked the chamber again out of habit, and set it on the counter. She turned around and walked back toward the main floor. If you're still watching and this story is getting under your skin the way it should be, subscribe to Legendary Veterans. Because the ending of this story is the part nobody saw coming. Not even Diana. Back in the main shop, a woman in a pressed blazer who had been watching from the moment Diana walked and stepped into her path. Mid-40s. The kind of polish that took effort. She looked at Diana's boots, then her face. "That was an interesting performance," she said, and the word performance landed like a deliberate cut. "But anyone can get lucky on a range. What exactly are you trying to prove here? Who are you trying to impress?" Diana picked up a box of 9mm rounds from the shelf beside her and set it on the counter. "I'm buying ammunition," she said simply. "You don't belong here," the woman said, her voice thinning at the edges. "You walk in here looking like that. You make a scene. And now what? You expect everyone to applaud." Diana set a second box of rounds on the counter beside the first. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look for backup. She turned to the woman slowly, the way a person turns when they have decided exactly how much of themselves to give the moment. "I spent 11 years making sure people like you could have conversations like this one without anyone trying to stop them," she said quietly. "You're welcome to keep having it." The woman's mouth opened slightly, then closed. A middle-aged man in a hunting jacket who had been nodding along with the woman a moment ago suddenly found something very interesting on the shelf beside him to look at. Derek, the security guard near the front entrance. Crisp uniform, new badge, the bearing of someone who had never been tested outside a parking lot. Pushed through toward the counter. He pointed at Diana's boots and her plain gray shirt and the worn canvas bag on her shoulder. "I need to see some ID," he said loudly. "And a license. And proof of any kind that you're legally authorized to handle a firearm like that." He said it like he was doing everyone a favor. Diana reached into her bag. For a moment, nobody breathed. She pulled out a worn leather wallet, opened it, and placed a laminated card on the counter. Garrett leaned forward. His expression shifted in a way that was hard to describe. Not surprise exactly, but the look of someone whose assumptions were reorganizing themselves at high speed. Derek looked at the card. His jaw moved. This can't be." "It can," Diana said, and put the wallet away. In the far corner, an old man with a trembling hand and a VFW pin on his collar had been watching the whole time without speaking. He stood up now, slowly, leaning slightly on the shelf beside him. His voice was rough and uncertain, like he wasn't sure he had the right person but couldn't stop himself from asking. "Were you at Corridor 7? He said quietly. "In '09. The winter op. There was a woman who..." He stopped. His hands were shaking harder now. "She pulled 4 of us out on foot. 14 hours. No radio. She never..." He swallowed. "She never told us her name." Diana looked at him for a long moment. "You made it," she said. The same 2 words. Nothing more. The old man sat back down. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth and looked at the floor. The bell above the door rang again. 2 men entered. Dark suits. Posture that came from discipline, not fashion. They didn't scan the room the way civilians do. They found Diana in under 1 second and walked directly to her. The taller one extended an envelope. The other stood at attention. Not a performance. Just training. "Operational recall," the taller one said. "Priority level 2. Departure in 15 minutes. The entire shop was listening now. Nobody pretended otherwise. Diana took the envelope. Read the single page inside. Folded it twice and put it in her bag. Then she turned back to Garrett and pointed at the 2 boxes of 9mm on the counter. "I'll take those, and a cleaning kit. The compact one, second shelf." Garrett got it for her without a word. His hands moved a little faster than usual. Kyle, who had started this whole thing with a joke about a craft store, was standing near the far wall with his cap in his hands, turning it in circles. He looked at the floor when Diana passed him. Then he looked up. Something in his face had changed, not guilt exactly, but the beginning of an understanding that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one carrying the most. "How did you?" he started. Diana paused. "Just barely." "You don't need to know what I did," she said. "You just need to remember how you acted before you knew." She paid at the counter. Exact change. No card. The old man in the VFW pin didn't stand up again, but as she passed him, he reached out and gripped her forearm for just a moment. One hand, trembling, certain. She stopped, looked down at his hand, then at his face. She nodded once. That was all. Outside, the black SUV was already running. Diana slid into the back without ceremony. The 2 men in suits followed. The vehicle pulled out of the lot slowly, without lights, without urgency. Within the hour, something strange began to happen. A customer who had been in the store during the entire incident, a retired Army sergeant, as it turned out, who had said nothing and filmed nothing but had watched everything, Posted 3 sentences in a closed veteran network group that afternoon. No name. No location. Just a description of what he had seen. A woman. A rifle. 11 seconds. A group of 5 rounds through a single hole at 75 yards. An envelope from men in suits. And an old man gripping her arm like she was the only real thing in the room. By evening, the thread had 400 responses. By the next morning, someone had cross-referenced the description with a partially declassified after-action report from a mountain operation in a country that the report didn't name. The name in the report was redacted. But certain details, a female operative, a solo extraction, 14 hours, for survivors, no radio, matched the old man's account with a precision that made several people in that thread go very quiet. No one confirmed anything. No one could. The gun shop's security footage from that afternoon was reviewed by Derek as part of an incident report he filed that evening, more to protect himself than anything else. When he watched the footage back, he saw what everyone else had seen. He wrote his report, set down his pen, and stared at the ceiling for a while. He resigned from the security position 2 weeks later. He enrolled in a law enforcement program. He didn't tell anyone why, but the people who knew him said he'd changed, that he'd gotten quieter, more careful, less sure that he knew what he was looking at when he looked at a person. Garrett kept the range target. He didn't frame it, didn't hang it on the wall. He kept it folded in the drawer beneath the register. And on the days when the shop got loud and shallow and full of the kind of noise that didn't mean anything, he'd open that drawer and look at it for a second. 5 rounds. 1 hole. 75 yards. Standing. Unfamiliar rifle. Then he'd close the drawer and get back to work. Kyle found the Veteran Network thread 3 days later through a mutual contact. He read it twice. He didn't post anything. He didn't share it. He just read it, put his phone face down on the table, and sat with whatever that felt like for a long time. The 5 rounds fired in that range were the loudest silence any of them had ever heard. Diana didn't look back at the town as the SUV moved through it. She didn't check her phone. She sat with her bag on her lap and the 2 boxes of 9mm rounds resting against her leg and watched the road become highway and the highway become open country and the open country become the kind of distance that doesn't have a name on any map she was allowed to carry. She had not come to that store to prove anything. She had not come to teach anyone a lesson or rewrite anyone's understanding of who she was. She had come to buy ammunition and a cleaning kit for a job that started in 48 hours, in a location she would not know until she opened the briefing in that envelope, in conditions that would require her to be exactly the person she had always been, invisible, precise, and completely unbothered by whether anyone in the room understood what they were looking at. She had been made the way certain things are made, slowly, under enormous pressure, in the dark, without an audience. The world doesn't always recognize what that looks like when it walks through a door in worn hiking boots and a plain gray shirt. Sometimes the world laughs. Sometimes it demands credentials. Sometimes it blocks the path and tells the thing it doesn't understand to go back to wherever it came from. Diana had never needed the world to understand. She just needed it to stay standing long enough for the people inside it to get home safe. That was the job. It had always been the job. The envelope in her bag had coordinates, a window, and a code word. She opened it again in the moving vehicle, read it the way she read everything. Once, completely, without blinking, and then folded it along the same creases and placed it back. The target on that range wall with the single hole at the center would eventually yellow and soften at the edges, the way all paper does. But the 5 men who had stood in that indoor range and watched it happen would not forget what they saw. Not the angle. Not the stillness. Not the way she set the rifle down afterward like it was nothing. Not because it was nothing, but because she had done it so many times in so many places under so many conditions that the extraordinary had become the baseline, and she had long since stopped noticing what the room looked like when it realized that. She pressed her head back against the headrest and closed her eyes. Somewhere behind her, in a small Colorado town, an old man with a VFW pin and shaking hands was sitting in his usual chair and doing nothing in particular. Just sitting. The way he had for years. Carrying what he carried. Letting it rest on him the way it always had. But something was different now. Someone had nodded at him. And for a man who had waited 15 years for that nod, it turned out that 2 words and a single gesture from the right person was enough to make the weight feel, for the first time in a very long time, like something he had been right to carry all along. Subscribe to Legendary Veterans, because some of the most important people in the room never say their own name.